and book chapters. Her seventh book, Yoruba Creativity, Cultural Practices of the Modern World, was recently published by Carolina Academic Press, and we will discuss this book today. So it is my pleasure as we're launching Dr. Howe's seventh book. Welcome, Dr. Bessie House Soramika.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, Miss Kennedy.
You are beautiful as always. You know, and I just want to put this little caveat in here. Dr. House is the foremost scholar in Northeast Ohio on entrepreneurship. There are other programs that are out here, but Dr. House is the originator. And you know, but they say flattery. What is that? They say, Dr. House, when people imitate you, that's flattery.
Yes.
So the other institutions that are doing the entrepreneurship, it's really, we know that you are the one of the foremost scholar. So I just wanted to put that little piece out there. Now she's currently completing her 8th book, African American Entrepreneurship, Philanthropic Giving, Self-Help, and the Struggle for Economic Empowerment. And that's for Indiana University Press. She currently serves as Professor of Political Science at Jackson State University. She is the president and CEO of BHS Creations, LLC, a company that provides products that reflect the beauty and diversity of the human experience. She is the president and founder of the International Black Business Museum, the first museum in the world dedicated to chronicling the history of Black enterprise in the world. That's amazing, Dr. House. She has received numerous awards for academic achievement, research, service, community, and civic engagement, and the organization of international conferences. She has been featured on the covers of Northern Ohio Live magazine, the city newspaper, and other venues. Her research has also been featured in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Akron Beacon Journal, the Cranes Business newspaper as well. She has also appeared on the Kaleidoscope television show, on Work and Money TV show, on ABC and NBC News affiliates, and on National Public Radio, among other radio programs. She was the host of her own television show in Cleveland, Let's Talk Business, and the host of her own internet radio show, the Dr. Bessie House Show. She holds not one, not two, but 3 chieftaincy titles, which include, and Dr. House, you may have to help me with this. Is it Erilu?
Yes.
Erilu Mayagun of Casey.
Uh-huh.
The second being
Erilu Bada Asiwaju of Egbaland.
Asuwaju of Egbaland, and the
Iyalaje of Bakatari Christians.
The Iyalaje of Bakatari Christians.
Yes.
These were conferred on her by a living Yoruba king, His Royal Majesty, King Michael Adedatun Arimu Badebo, the Alaki and paramount ruler of Egbaland, Nigeria. So again, welcome, Dr. Bessie House Soramika. So Dr. House, let's just go here. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you. And I really want you to kind of let's start with your childhood, Dr. House. You know, what are some of the things in your childhood or later in your life that led you to become a scholar and a writer? Does anything stand out in particular?
Yes, well, hello, Miss Kennedy. It's always a pleasure to be with you. You're such an extraordinary person, so talented and so engaged with the broader community around you. And it's just always a pleasure to be together with you. And I'm happy we have this opportunity to talk a little bit about my background, my books, etc. So absolutely, my childhood had a great deal to do with who I am today. I am the product of an extended family. I grew up in a small town called Lynette, Alabama, in the heart of Dixie, in the rural South at that time. And it was a pleasure growing up there, even though many people have some ideas or stereotypes in their mind about what the South was like. But for me, I grew up in almost an idyllic home. It was an extended family home, which was really a carryover from our roots in Africa. So instead of having a nuclear family household where we had father, mother children, we had an extended family where we had our grandmother, who was the matriarch and leader of our family. Her name is Mrs. Bessie Annie Fanning. So I'm named for her, and I'm very proud to carry her name because she was really a very extraordinary woman, a woman who was extremely talented and who actually went to college in the early 1900s at Tuskegee College for teachers. So she was an educator. So I grew up in a family where we had the grandmother, we had my father, we had my mother, we had my aunt, my uncle, my siblings, and we also had cousins. So we had lots of people in that house, and it was a bit crowded at times. We were bumping into each other on occasion, but we had lots of love and support. And it was that love that provided that cornerstone for us to become really significant actors, not only in our home, but also in the broader community. So I definitely want to emphasize the importance of family. The family is a very important institution in society. And so it was in that environment that I learned the importance of respecting myself first and respecting others. As my grandmother would say, before you can respect others, you have to have self-respect, and it starts here. And so I'm very, very happy that I had that upbringing. We had a very disciplined home. We had to be obedient. We had to observe rules and regulations. It was a very structured environment where we had to do homework, we had to do chores around the house, and we had to interact and respect our elders, our other family members, and also our siblings, etc. And so it was a delightful way for us to have that first beginning in life. And from there, we took those value systems out into the broader community. And as the African adage says, it takes a village to raise a child. So as we were walking up and down in our neighborhood, the neighbors would say hello to you and find out who you are. Pretty soon you became known to them, and they were very concerned about what happened to you. So they really cared about you. So we had this very tight-knit family that was operating within the context of this broader community of well-wishers. These people were wishing us well, encouraging us to go to school on time and to obey the rules. And so the neighbors were also part of that nexus of support. And from there, we also had the schools. I went to Lanier High School for the first 6 years of my educational process, and all of the teachers were African-American teachers, and they were very brilliant people. And they were more than teachers. They were also our surrogate parents as well, because we were more than just students to them. They really cared about our progress in the classes. And so that was a wonderful opportunity for me to learn about the books and the importance of books. But I will point out that I grew up in a household of educators. And so beyond the books in school, all around my house, there would be books and magazines to read. And so I came from a group of educators. My mother was a school teacher. My aunt was a school teacher. My grandmother was a school teacher. And my uncle was a school teacher. And all of them had gone to college. So I came from a generation or a family that valued education. So my grandmother was first generation college. My father and mother were second generation. So in my family, I'm third generation, and then our children will be fourth. And so it was that heritage of understanding that knowledge is power, even in the early period, and that we needed to put something in our minds so that we could become productive citizens. And so all of those things loom large in my background. And so as a child, I began to read more books. I was always innately curious about the world around me. I wanted to know what was happening in those books. And I would read about people in faraway places. And I would say, wow, this is so interesting. Maybe I can do those things. Maybe I can go to those places at some point in the future. And so the curiosity continued. And then I began to put my pen to paper, began to write poetry, had some successes there, participated in some competitions to win prizes and got some successes there, and just continued to develop my craft. I will point out that my grandmother is an essential part in the writing process because my grandmother was a great storyteller. And I was very close to her, and I would ask her many questions about philosophy and history and religion. And she would always give me narratives to explain things because I was a young child. And so that storytelling ability has stayed with me throughout my life, because if you read some of my books, you'll find I am also part of the narrative, my own lived history, and the storytelling that I learned as a child becomes a central methodology that I use in my speaking engagements, when I'm doing keynote speeches, or when I'm writing books. And I find that it enables me to bond with the readers and the audience more when you break it down and simplify it in a language that people can understand. So I would say those are some central things. And going on to college, Huntington College in Montgomery, Alabama, my undergraduate alma mater, majoring in English. And ironically, when I look back on my records at the college and they said, "What do you want to be for your career?" I said, "I would like to be a great writer one day." Even I was amazed when I found some of the old yearbooks, etc. And so I'm not sure I would consider myself great. I'm certainly, but I am a writer, and a certain amount of humility goes with what we do. We like for others to appreciate our work. That's for the public to decide if they think this work reaches that pinnacle. But certainly, it's been enjoyable and exciting. And I hope to continue on that level of writing more.
Well, I'm sure you will, because I know you're working on book number 8. But how did you come about writing this book? This is your 7th book. And let me just say, Dr. House, you know, things happen for a reason. But this year in particular, I've been searching for my West African roots. I went to Oyo Tunji in South Carolina. It's one of the oldest African, preserving African Yoruba culture in the United States. Because I know that my grandmother, whom I love dearly, was a Geechee Gullah person, and she's from that area. Now, and I've been to Africa several times, but I haven't been to Nigeria. So I have to go to Nigeria, and I have to go this year, but by the end of this year, the beginning of next year. It's something about, it's just calling me. So when you told me that you were doing this book, I just couldn't believe it. I just want to say that. So how did you come about writing this 7th book?
Well, I always like to determine what areas excite me, first of all, before I can embark on a project of writing a book or even a journal article. I have to feel some kind of excitement about the topic, because writing books and doing research and interviewing people and distilling the information, writing, rewriting, taking this paragraph out, adding that in, is a very tedious process. It's laborious. However, it can be meaningful if you really are excited and passionate about your subject matters. And so writing about Nigeria is something that I was very passionate about. A colleague and mentor of mine recommended, I had done a few articles on the Yoruba, and he recommended that I work to create a book, a larger manuscript that really looked more at Yoruba culture and traditions. And I'm happy that my mentor recommended that, because that allowed me to really come up with a writing project plan on what I wanted to focus on. And so the idea was suggested by a mentor and colleague, and I began to think about it and write my proposal about how I wanted to bring it together, and I got excited about it. And I had gone to Nigeria for six times over the past decade or so. And in that time period, I would be collecting data, interviewing people. I was doing keynote speeches, and I was able to use a lot of that information to really fit in with the cultural traditions of the Yoruba people. And so that really formed the basis for the content of Yoruba creativity, cultural practices of the modern world. And so it's an opportunity to really look at Africa in all of its glory and splendor, because we see very, very minute images of Africa on television, on the news. They may give Africa 2 minutes out of an hour or 2 hours segment of news. So Africa has been pushed to the back burner, and we see other civilizations and other countries at the forefront. And so we need to change that narrative.
Absolutely.
We need to put Africa at the forefront. Africa is the birthplace of humankind. Many people are not even aware that the first human beings, the first habitants on this earth, were not in Europe. They were not in Europe. They were not in Asia. They were in Africa. So Africa has a centrality in terms of our understanding of who we are as part of the human species. And so I felt an enormous sense of responsibility to really make this known as I go out and about in my book signing tour and my lectures about Africa. And I've been teaching about Africa for many, many years throughout my career. I studied about Africa in college and done research in various countries. And so it's really part of my mission to really excite people about Africa.
Well, I am very excited. I mean, this is amazing. Yoruba creativity, cultural practices of the modern world. Now, the book focuses attention on the Yoruba ethnic group. So who are the Yoruba people and why are they important?
Okay, that's a very good question, Ms. Kennedy. Nigeria, first of all, is the most populous country in Africa. It is located in West Africa. And in Nigeria, you have about 196 or more people. The population continues to grow. So about 1 in every 5 Africans is a Nigerian. So Nigeria is a very important country. Nigeria has a lot of natural resources. It is also one of the world's major producers of oil and has tremendous potential to do a lot in the future in terms of development. Nigeria also has a lot of background in terms of cultural kingdoms. And for example, among the Yoruba, you have the Oyo kingdom and other kingdoms that were thriving long before Europeans went to Africa. And so I wanted to really talk and celebrate Yoruba culture. Who are the Yoruba in particular? In Nigeria, there are more than 250 distinct ethnic groups. And what is an ethnic group? An ethnic group is a group of people who share things in common. They have a common culture, they have a common history, they trace their lineage back to a common founder, they have similar physical characteristics and similar value systems. So you have 250 or more different ethnic groups, and the Yoruba are one of the 3 largest ethnic groups. There are more than 40 million Yoruba people that reside in Nigeria, predominantly in the southwestern region of the country. And of course, some live in neighboring countries, but also you have a sizable Yoruba American community as well, as part of the diaspora. So some of the other large ethnic groups are the Igbos that live predominantly in the southeast. You have the Yoruba that live predominantly in the southwest. And you also have the Hausa Fulani that live in the northern region. And so the 250 plus groups have to learn to live together and to be able to work together for the betterment of the bigger Nigerian country. And so the Yoruba are very important because they have very unique cultural characteristics and values. And many of these values are wonderful, and many of them have survived on into the current time period and have helped to provide stability for their families, for their communities, and the broader population. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of those, hopefully during our discussion as we move forward today. So the Yoruba are a very important ethnic group, and I am also Yoruba, so that's also part of it because it's authentic. I'm also Yoruba, so I'm also talking about my own experience as a Yoruba woman as well. Even though I was born in Alabama, I've become Yorubaized, and we'll talk about that.
Right, that's wonderful.
As well.
Now, the book, Yoruba Creativity, Cultural Practices of the Modern World, in Chapter 3, you discuss the critical role of Yoruba women. How important have women's roles been in Nigeria over time?
Well, there is a saying that women hold up half the sky, and I must admit I certainly agree with that, because women really today, when you add up all the numbers of women and men in the world, you're finding that women are the majority of the world's population. And women comprise a large percentage of the population in Nigeria and also amongst the Yoruba. And so women have played important roles from time immemorial. When you look at the role of women in the pre-colonial period before the Europeans went there, they had important roles to play on through the colonial period and now in the post-colonial or after colonialism has ended. Their roles are continuing to exist and continuing to expand and grow. So I'm going to start out with a few central things because I do want people to get the book and get to more details. But I would say that women have been very, very important in terms of their roles as wives, mothers, and people who were nurturing their families and their children. So in Yoruba culture, from a cultural point of view, women were encouraged to be good citizens of their respective communities. They were encouraged to get married. Marriage was a high point in a woman's life in the pre-colonial and colonial, and even today. Marriage was considered to be an important institution where people could come together and develop families. Why were families important? Families were important so that we could have the perpetuation of the clan, the perpetuation of their lineages. And so families were encouraged to go forward and multiply, to have children, to help them around, to do work in the agricultural sector, to help, with chores and other things, and to keep that family name continuing to move on throughout history. And so women have done a tremendous job. I would say that African women are lovers of children. African women typically are lovers of family, children. They're involved in cementing relationships between their spouse and other members of the extended family and clan. In African society, marriage was not just a relationship between one man and one woman. It was a relationship between two families. Mm-hmm. So when the people came together to get married, it was the amalgamation or combination of multiple family units. And because of that collective approach, when the marriage began to break down and they would have problems, everybody was involved in trying to keep them together for the sake of the collective. And so it's a wonderful thing. In the Western world, we think of romance, falling in love, and all of these kinds of movies that you have depicting that. I'm in love with John. John is in love with me. But it's in African culture, it's a bit more significant than that. Marriages are also built on friendship. And so marriage relationships are like flowers. You're putting some soil there. You're putting some water in there. You're taking care that that plant is growing. In the same kind of way, care is needed to make sure that that relationship grows, expands, and prospers over time. And so people are fundamentally good friends. Beneath the romance and other things that occur, good friends, and friendship develops. It goes, ebbs and flows. But if you have a good, solid relationship, it kind of helps you as things go bad, and as things go good, you have solid ground. And so those kinds of things are very, very significant. In the African family, I would say that the Western world has an image of the African woman as being in the home. Because in the Western world, traditionally, the women were in the home. But that's not necessarily true for Yoruba women, because Yoruba women were taking care of the family, the husband, the children, cooking, cleaning, being good nurturers. But they were also outside of the home. They were involved in productive activities that would allow them to have a livelihood for their children, for their families. So each person had responsibilities. There was a complementary relationship between men and women. They respected each other. The men had certain roles to play. The women had certain roles to play. And if everyone had their roles and they were doing them and executing, then that led to stability in the relationship. Now, that is not to say that men were not the dominant actors in African society in the pre-colonial and colonial era, because they were. So even in spite of the complementary nature and the reciprocity, you still had males being predominantly the major actors, both in the home and outside of the home. And certainly that has changed a lot in the modern period, where you've had more changes occurring in women's roles. And we'll talk later about that as well, because women have made remarkable strides through the years, and you have a metamorphosis that has taken place with regard to how women view themselves and how others are viewing them. So I would just say that women, some were involved in the agricultural sector, a lot of them were involved in trade and commercial activities, but it was all for the greater good of their ethnic group, their clan. And Yoruba cultural values stress that women were involved in passing on cultural values to the children. So the Yoruba children had certain traditions that they had to embody. You had naming ceremonies for the children, and the names were not just any name. these names that were given to the children had some connection with the cultural history, the history and background of the family. So even the Yoruba names mean something. And so I would say that the women have always had an important role to play in Yoruba society and are still going strong today in the 21st century.
Do you think that the role of women has changed? And if so, what has brought this about?
Well, a lot of things have brought about the change in the role of women, and the answer is definitely yes. Mm-hmm. Women are certainly in a better position today than they were in the pre-colonial and colonial period. What has brought about the change? Very quickly, education has certainly brought about change. As people have been reading and being exposed to new ideas, they realize that knowledge is power. And as women have become more educated, they are now able to get careers. They have been getting careers in areas that may have typically been populated by men. And so with those types of jobs, they're getting salaries for those, they have prestige, and a certain amount of power has come along with that. So education for women is important. Back in the early period in African society, when people had a chance to determine who would go to education, typically they would tend to favor the male child to go, and the females were left behind. But that has changed, and as you can see, all over the world, women are getting their second wind now, and at many universities, you see larger and larger numbers of women. So education has been a part of it. Changing cultural values. Culture consists of the values, attitudes, and beliefs of a population over time. But no culture exists in static. Changes are taking place. Changes occur because of economic needs. Now, when children are passing away and children don't survive as much, then you need to change your strategies in terms of the household economy. So women are becoming asked to do even more within that context. Also, you have globalization, where we're now watching television. People are watching radios, and they're seeing what's happening in other parts of the world, what women are doing. Women are traveling to other parts of the world, and they're being exposed to new ideas. And so there are lots of reasons why the roles are changing. The societies are not in static. We have modernization taking place. You need the talents of men and women. Women are capable as medical doctors, as engineers, as university professors. They are entrepreneurs. So they have a broader number of roles that they can occupy in different types of careers. And so it's been a very, very fascinating process.
Okay, so Dr. House, Chapter 4 focuses on the role of African kings, queens, and chiefs. So why is it important for people to know about the great heritage of Africa?
It's very important for people to know about the great heritage of Africa because this has been a hidden part of our history. I remember when I was a young girl growing up in Alabama and going to schools, I can honestly say that I never read a book that we were assigned to read as children that had anything at all about the contributions of Africa to world civilization processes. I learned about the Greeks and the Romans, but I never learned anything about the African people. For that matter, I never learned about the African American people that were doing great things in this country, that have been working and piling and working in the fields to build this country. America has benefited from the unremunerated labor of the slaves and other people who had genius and talents. And they were really behind the scene actors. They were not given credit, but they were doing a lot of the work. And so we never really had any textbooks that had anything about the leaders of our movements. We didn't learn anything about inventors, entrepreneurs, any of that. I had to go to graduate school before I ever learned anything about Africa, and that shouldn't happen. We should be exposed to the greatness of our ancestry. Now, when I was growing up, I did see television shows about Tarzan, who was a person of non-African ancestry who was growing up in Africa, and I would see him swinging through the trees and kicking the native people and always winning. And I asked my grandmother, why is it that that man, Tarzan, always does better than the local people who know the terrain, they know the trees and everything? And so I did find that strange as a child, that a non-indigenous person would be able to outwit the people of color. And when you see negative images cast of your own people, always in a negative light, you begin to withdraw. And you may say, I don't want to be affiliated with that population. I don't want to be a part of my own history. And so I think that it's very scary that we have been going for so many years without really getting any positive impact of what people of color have done, the genius of Africa and African descended people. And so definitely I do think that Africa must be projected more. Not just projected, but we must look at the positive things, not just negative things that are taking place.
Absolutely. Now, you were born in Alabama, as you stated, but in chapter 4, which is the monarchy, titled The Monarchy, you did a wonderful job of recounting how you became Yoruba and the importance of that process. Can you talk a little bit about that process of you becoming Yoruba?
Absolutely, Ms. Kennedy. I will be happy to talk about the process of becoming Yoruba. I would start out by saying that the process of becoming a Yoruba woman has taken place over a significant period of time. And it has involved several levels. It involves the spiritual part. It involves academic journey and doing research. It involves relationship with my spouse. It involves getting to know Yoruba people and also the academic part. So you have the spiritual part, the physical part of traveling to Nigeria at least 6 times, getting to know the people, doing research, poking here and there, getting the data that I needed, and the reality of what it was like to be Yoruba. So the process can be summed up in a variety of ways. First, academically, I've been a professor for many years, and I began my study about Africa when I was a student at what is now the Joseph Carbell School of International Studies at the University of Denver in Colorado. Cold country, very cold place, but very wonderful institution. And so I began it was an eye-opener to really find out about Africa. So I underwent that metamorphosis and began to travel to Africa to do research. And then, of course, I met my wonderful, delightful spouse who is here in the studio with us, Sir Chief Dr. Maurice A.E. Shuramakem, who I've been married to for many years. And Sir Chief Dr. Maurice Shuramakem is a wonderful spouse, and he is also a distinguished physician who specializes in gynecology and obstetrics. And so in the marital context, I had to learn what it was like to be a Yoruba woman married to a Yoruba man. And so he was doing a great job of indoctrinating me on the expectations of a Yoruba wife, but he did it in a really, really polite way because he's a man of a very few words. And so living in a Yoruba household, because he's the head of our household, was also part of the process of becoming Yoruba. And from there, of course, the quintessential part of becoming Yoruba occurred when we received 3 chieftaincy titles in 2008, and we went back. That's one of the 6 trips to Nigeria, and we were there for several days, and we underwent the process of fully becoming Yorubais by becoming Yoruba chiefs. And as you mentioned earlier, one of the chieftaincies was given to us by a real live Yoruba king, living king, His Royal Majesty, King Michael Adedetum Aramu Badebu, the Okikinu IV, the Alake and paramount ruler of Egbaland. And so that would be a brief summary of my process of becoming Yorubized or Yoruba person.
Okay, Dr. House, and also there's pictures in the books of the Obas, and we can get more into that. But so to become a Yoruba chief, what does that involve? I mean, what is the process to become a Yoruba chief?
Okay,
or let me ask you this: are you a chief? Is your husband the chief? Are you a chief? I mean, how? Please explain that to us today, please.
Okay, absolutely. I'll be happy to do that because it does seem complex, but I'll try to make it simple to get to the heart of it. So absolutely, I hold 3 chieftaincy titles, and my husband, Sir Chief Dr. Maurice Shuramakem, holds 3 chieftaincy titles.
Okay.
So what does it actually mean to become an African chief, I would say that my husband and I are extremely humbled by being conferred these chieftaincy titles, because being an African chief is considered to be one of the most exalted positions that a person can hold in African society. It's a very exalted and high honor. And the fact that one of our chieftaincies was bestowed upon us by a real living king of a real kingdom called Egbaland, with more than 1 million inhabitants, it's a sizable geographical area, even makes it more impactful and also more humbling. Neither my husband and I could have ever imagined that we would be given such high exalted honor. And these are things that we will always remember, we will never forget. So what is the process in a nutshell? And the book, of course, goes into much greater detail on that. But I would say, in summary, getting a chieftaincy title is a very complicated process. It is a very competitive process that one has to go through. When I talked to His Royal Majesty about chieftaincies and the awarding of this, he mentioned several important things that are also part of the landscape, the historical landscape, that when you are bestowed the honor of being a chief, there is a belief in Yoruba culture that you embody the traditions that chiefs should have. One, a chief should be considered to be a person of good moral character. Moral turpitude is certainly a key factor. A person that is respectful in his or her interactions with others. A person that can serve as a role model for members of the broader community. A person who has done deeds that would impact on improving the condition of humanity. A person who is willing to pledge support to the king and other chiefs in trying to promote economic progress in Egbaland, to promote political development in Egbaland, and to really use his or her platform, whatever that may be, to really improve the lives of the common man and woman. And there are millions of people who need help in the world. And so you have to embody these characteristics before you are ever considered for chieftaincy status. So how does the process work? Well, before you can ever become a chief that is anointed by a Yoruba king, you have to start at the lower level where your ancestral linkages are. Because my husband's ancestry is with the city of Casey, a smaller town or city in southwest Nigeria, chiefs nominated us or him and then I for the opportunity to be chief. So you are nominated, you have to be nominated, and there are committees that come together to vet you, meaning that you have to be vetted. Just because you're nominated, it doesn't mean you'll make it through. It's a very arduous process. And they examine your background, they examine your history, they examine various attributes to see if you fit those, and whether or not you have been using your opportunities to really help humanity and those types of things. So we went through that process, a vetting process, and we were notified that as a result of that vetting competitive process, we were then going to be bestowed with the chieftaincy in Casey. So we went through that ceremony, and in Casey, my title is Erelu Mayagun of Casey, and my husband's title is Mayagun of Casey. And so on the first day of the chieftaincy ceremonies, we went through the cultural traditions. Some of those I can't speak about because there are some things that are confidential. There are some ceremonies that we had to participate in and embody. And then from there, we had jubilation, we had a reception in Casey. Well-wishers came, family members, etc. Other members of the local chief group who put us forward also came. On the next day or two, we then got our second chieftaincy title, and that was at the Ake Palace in Abeokuta. And this is where His Royal Majesty resides, at this beautiful palace in Abeokuta, which is part of Egbaland. And here we had to undergo the participating in different cultural traditions as well. We were brought out to the Ake courtyard. His Royal Majesty was escorted out in the traditional way. And also you had members of the clergy there. You had other chiefs present. You had well-wishers. You had members of the Chiefs Council. You had a lot of people there. So we had cultural oath that we had to go through. We had to pledge our allegiance to Egbalan and undergo that process. And we had to kneel. We had to prostrate, because that's the cultural tradition, to give respect to the king, the queen that were sitting at the dais. And we incorporated all of those. And of course, we went down and on our knees, and His Royal Majesty said some words over us, and he has put the chieftaincy cap. This is a chieftaincy cap that I am wearing. It has Edalu Bada Azewaju of Egbilan on it. The beads that I wear are reflective of chieftaincy. Chiefs wear beads. They are known by the beads that they wear. These are beads on my hands. These are beads here. And we had special chieftaincy attire that was created for us by the seamstresses in Nigeria. It was a very elaborate process. After all of that procedure was finished, we had jubilation. We had a reception, again, well-wishers coming. And we also had a chance to interact with His Royal Majesty, the Queen, the King and Queen again. And of course, on the next day, we got our third chieftaincy titles at the Bakatari Church of Christians in Bakatari area. And our title there, my title is Iyalaje of Bakatari Christians. And my husband also has a title as well. So these ceremonies meant a great deal, because this is not a theoretical thing. Chieftaincy is not a theory. It's a reality. It's something that I embody. And I hope that I have given credence to that by describing a lot of this in this book. A lot of beautiful pictures, as Ms. Kennedy has said as well.
Beautiful. You know, what does it feel like to embrace and go through the cultural traditions that made you a chief? What does that feel like? I don't even know if we can understand the significance here, because we're not used to that. You know, we see a president of the United States, a vice president, but the Oba and the Olori is the queen title, correct?
Yes.
They're like what I guess the Western world would be like the Pope or the president or the prime minister. So what does that feel like to go through that traditional?
Well, I feel as if I have undergone a metamorphosis, that I have undergone a tremendous change. That when I started out my life in a very small town in Alabama years ago, I had one perspective, but now I feel whole. I feel a sense of peace. I feel a sense of serenity, that I have surrendered myself to be able to connect with my history. Many people have been running from Africa. They've been running from their history. So I have had an opportunity to embrace this history in a way that I never dreamt possible. And so it's been a very, very profoundly impactful experience for me. It's a humbling experience, as I continue to say. I'm delighted to say that we have developed a very close relationship with His Royal Majesty, the King. He is a very modern monarch, and he uses technology. He sends text messages. We talk to him on the phone regularly, on his cell phone. When we call him up, in a few seconds, he'll call us back, and we're saying, wait a minute, this is a real living king who's calling us back within less than 10 minutes after we make this call. And, you know, he's busy exercising administrative authority over Egbalan, the entire Egbalan, administratively. He's working with this population to promote economic development, political change. Many people are coming, asking for assistance in a variety of ways. And the idea that a real living king talks to us by phone, and when he comes to America, we see him, we interact with him, and when we go there, we also have lunch at the Ake Palace. We go in and we bow, we give him the cultural respect, and oftentimes he'll invite us to have lunch, and we'll go into the big dining room. Imagine eating lunch or dinner with a real living king. That seems like something out of a movie, but it's really quite a humbling experience and a wonderful experience for sure.
Now, chapter 5 and chapter 6. Chapter 5, entrepreneurial culture. Chapter 6, women, work, culture, and business. You must get this book. It's outstanding. Dr. House, tell me when chapter 5 and 6, okay, you're focusing on entrepreneurship. For example, chapter 5 examines male and female businesses, and chapter 6 focuses on women entrepreneurs in pre-colonial, colonial, and present day period. So give us just a little snippet, because we want to kind of get through the book. We got about, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. Just give us a little snippet about chapter 5 and 6, because entrepreneurship, that's how I met you. And again, Dr. House is the preeminent entrepreneur in Northeast Ohio. There are duplicators, but Dr. House is the beginning.
Thank you.
As far as I know.
Thank you.
I don't, I see people doing things now, but I was with you. What was that, 2005, 2006?
Yes, in 2004, 5, and 6.
Right. You started it at Kent State University. I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about all of that, but you started the Entrepreneurial Academy at Kent State University. You had a satellite office in Glenville.
Yes.
Do we want to call it a satellite office or an extension office?
An extension, the Entrepreneurial Academy of Greater Cleveland, yes.
And we were there about, a year, 2 years?
From 2004 through 07, somewhere
Right,
there.
that was a part of that empowerment zone.
Yes.
And we really hope that comes back to Cleveland. I think it's very needed. But so let's talk a little bit about the entrepreneurial culture, Dr. House.
Okay, I'm very happy to talk about the entrepreneurial culture amongst the Yoruba and the importance of entrepreneurship in business. Absolutely. So when we talk about entrepreneurship in business, we're really talking about the ways that people are involved in productive activities. And the role of those activities is to bring some assets or to improve one's standard of living. And I'm delighted to say that entrepreneurship is part of the culture of Yoruba people. It's been part of the culture in the pre-colonial period, the colonial, and even today. And so there was a belief system that all members of the population had to be doing something that was positive and to be engaged in trying to uplift their families and communities. What better way to do this than to have businesses and commercial activities? And so supporting one's family and culture was very, very important. In the pre-colonial era, we had a number of Yoruba kingdoms that were very, very advanced. I talked about one. Perhaps one of the most well-known was the Oyo Empire. And we know that during the pre-colonial period, people did live in rural communities, but some of them were urban dwellers and lived in towns. And in some of the urban communities, the people lived very, very well. During the pre-colonial era, they had more than enough to satisfy their needs. I want to point out that some scholars have emphasized that the Iron Age already existed in Africa before the Europeans went there. The Iron Age was already in operation before Europeans penetrated Africa. You also had numerous crafts that were being developed. You had leather, you had wood, you had stone, you had a lot of different products being developed. In the pre-colonial era, we had a lot of traders and entrepreneurs. You had carvers, you had blacksmiths, you had carpenters, you had manufacturers of salt, you had people who specialized in herbs, you had weavers, you had people who were dyeing cloth, who were making cloth, who were selling clothing. You had a variety of entrepreneurial activities that many people are not aware of. Some people were in the agricultural sector, participating in farming, producing products so that people would have enough food to eat. But others were involved in local trade activities. You had a lot of local traders out there and occupying their spaces. So you had local trade activities. You also had long distance trade, where sometimes people would travel significant distances in order to trade and barter the kinds of products that they were creating. I'm delighted to say that women were some of the most dominant participants in local trade activities, but women also participated in long distance trade on occasion. And sometimes people don't understand that women were important economic actors in Yoruba culture in the pre-colonial era, colonial era, and even today. And so these are some of the things that I talk about in this book, the role of these entrepreneurs. when you look at entrepreneurship, if you go to Nigeria today, when you get off of the plane, you go into Lagos, you're going to see lots of people selling, hawkers, people selling their wares, sometimes on the highways and the byways. They're everywhere because entrepreneurship is so ingrained. You got to do something. You got to survive. And also, there are fewer jobs in the urban economy, such as what we have in the United States. And in the absence of that, you have to really create your own livelihood. And so part of it is cultural, part of it has been spurred on by the conditions that people find themselves in. And so in the chapter about the women, I point out a few of these women entrepreneurs who are very, very central actors. I want to just mention that I'm going to read something from page 190 where Lorraine Denzer is talking about how women understand entrepreneurship. She says, according to Denzer, except for the very old people and infirm, all women engaged in household production, crafts, or trade, sometimes combining careers in all of these areas. Trading dominated the activities of women in urban centers, and their training began early. Under the tutelage of their mothers, female relatives, or guardians, little girls hawked various commodities. Whereas trading activities varied according to their means, from selling small quantities of food items outside of the compound or in the local markets to long-distance trading or on a very large scale. So this really emphasizes that culturally, women were valued as producers. They were using their ingenuity and talent to really do a lot of things. I don't know if we have time for me to give you a few examples of outstanding female entrepreneurs.
I don't know if we have time,
Okay.
Dr. House. If we're going to talk about the International Black Business Museum.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. We may need
Okay.
to do this again, Dr. House. No,
Okay.
I don't
Well,
think
certainly we'll. I would
you want to
just
mention one?
I would just say that one of our relatives, Lady Sumba Shuramakem, is an international entrepreneur. She started off with simple means, and she started producing food items, selling them, and then from there, she went on to own shopping centers. Now she travels to Dubai, China, and she is an international entrepreneur. She has her own building and also created her own hotel. So it is possible. So she is certainly a gifted entrepreneur. Lady Sumba Shuramakem is one example. There are many others in the book. Okay.
Well, that being said, Dr. House, we must talk about the International Black Business Museum. You are the president and the founder of the International Black Business Museum. Can you tell us your mission and the goal of the museum?
Absolutely. The International Black Business Museum was created in 2019 in order to really honor the contributions of Black entrepreneurs and inventors in the United States and other parts of the world. Amazingly, in spite of their tremendous genius and acumen, many people don't know anything about what these entrepreneurs have produced, the impacts of these products on the economy, or their impact on the world. And so the International Black Business Museum has been designed or created to really bridge that gap. And so the International Black Business Museum has been operating virtually since its inception because of COVID-19, but we're soon going to have a physical site, and we're working on some virtual exhibits right now. So the International Black Business Museum, www.theibbm.com. I encourage you to join our movement and to find out about us and how you can assist us in reaching our goals. Thank you.
Now, how does your work as president of the International Black Business Museum connect with your research on African business owners and African American business owners?
Very briefly, as a scholar, I realized that it's not enough just to write books and put them out there in the libraries or in the hands of the population. You have to use it to really help people. And so the work that I do, the books that I write, are really designed to have a practical application. So as you are aware, some of my earlier books focused on entrepreneurs in Cleveland confronting the odds. And in that book, I looked at why businesses succeed, why do they fail, and I used the results of that to create a curriculum that was designed to help people to create businesses and wealth. And I'm delighted that more than 400 people attended our classes, and a number of them had successful businesses. You were one of our outstanding graduates of the Entrepreneurial Academy that you talked about earlier. So absolutely, it's very important for us to use research in a way that helps people to solve real world problems. And so my research on entrepreneurs in Yoruba land, the entrepreneurs in the United States, really connects very well with the museum because our focus is on entrepreneurs and inventors and how we can get that message out to the world so that young people will have somebody to look up to. We need role models, and there's so many of them that they may not even be aware of. So that really is one of those connecting points.
All right, and Dr. House, you served as the founding executive director of the Entrepreneurial Academy of the former Cleveland Empowerment Zone. Some years ago, I was one of the participants and graduates of this wonderful program. Many of our leaders today, Councilwoman Stephanie House, Vicki Trotter has a program in Glenville, just to name a couple. Now, tell me, what do you think you achieved what you were expecting when you created this Entrepreneurial Academy and the program at Kent State and in Glenville? And what do you want to do now? What would you like to see happening right now, Dr. House?
Okay, very briefly, I think we actually superseded our efforts. We actually achieved more than we hoped for. We wanted to really encourage people to become entrepreneurs and to start their businesses, and we did very well in terms of working with people in the urban core of Cleveland to create businesses, to learn about entrepreneurship in a practical way. And what do I want to see happen today? I want to see more and more African Americans, African descended populations really go outside of the box, think outside of the box, and to take risk and become entrepreneurs and invent something that will have a lasting impact.
Okay, and again, the book that we're talking about is Yoruba Creativity, Cultural Practices of the Modern World. Why should people purchase a copy of this book, Yoruba Creativity?
Well, I would like people to purchase a copy because I think they can be empowered and to learn more about their history, their culture, and I do think it will enhance their own self-esteem. There's a lot of good information in here that we haven't covered. Excellent. And it's a way for them to have this, to share with their children, grandchildren, members of the community. And definitely, if people would like to purchase the book, they can go to the Carolina Academic Press website, and I also have some of the copies as well I'll be using in book events as I will be going to my book signings.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bessie House Soramikam. It was my pleasure to talk to you today. You must get a copy of this book. We just touched the surface.
Thank you.
Enjoy your evening.
Thank you so much. Thank you.